So for the next few videos, I'm going to look at some f.m.v games, that's full motion video games. Now you'd think all video games would be considered full motion, right? Unless it's like a text adventure or something. But what full motion video really means is the usage of pre-recorded clips within a game. Between the generations of 16-bit consoles and the new 3D generation of consoles, there was a kind of weird period where developers were kind of trying to figure out what to do with all this new technology.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? Huh? What are you waiting for, Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show 'em!
CDs were starting to creep in, and they had a ton more space available on them than the traditional cartridges. So one of the more experimental routes developers took was using recorded footage of real life. What looks more real than reality? It was almost like cheating the system a little bit. All you needed was a video camera, and there you had it. A video game that looked like real life. Now some of these games have started to make a little comeback. Nothing too crazy, but we've got 3 separate f.m.v games to look at on PS4, all being released within the past few years. Though not necessarily originally developed then, only one of them's actually a newer game. So I figured I'll do these in sorta chronological order, you'll get what I mean in a second, by starting with Night Trap. So while this was released on the PlayStation 4 in 2017, originally it got released in 1992 on the Sega CD, or Mega CD as we called it here. It made it to a couple of other systems as well, I think like the CDI and that kind of thing, or the 3DO, one of them, or both, I don't know. Now from what I'm aware, the original footage for this was all filmed in the mid-80s to be a VHS based game. Apparently that was a thing, although I don't think it got very far. I don't recall any VHS games being a big deal at any point in time. So it sat on the shelf for a few years before finally getting released, making this one the first one developed out of the 3 games I'm looking at. This has become an absolute cult classic. It's the B-movie of video games that's become a big deal over time. But that's enough talk for now. Let's take a look at some of the gameplay and have a look at how it's translated to the PlayStation 4 release. So what is it like to play the cult classic Night Trap? Well, first of all, I'll let this guy explain.
Students that have been coming up to work the resort on this side of the lake have been disappearing right and left.
We suspect they're using the winery house as a cover, and they're getting anyone who stumbles onto their scheme, whatever that is.
One of our guys put an override on the camera cable unit here in the back hallway. Which means we have complete control of the cameras and the traps.
But who operates that?
They do.
And who's that?
I'm not exactly certain. Special operators from Control. But we gotta work together on this one. And you keep your eyes open. We're all depending on you, especially Kelly.
Okay, that didn't really do the trick, so I'll explain it the best I can. You play as you, yourself. You're just some guy. Gameplay is dead simple. There's 8 cameras, all playing concurrently, which are set up to look like CCTV or hidden cameras. The idea is flick between them, and every time you see one of these dopey looking bad guys that walk around like ape men, you trap them. There are a couple of basic mechanics involved here. So you press the circle button to activate the trap, but there's a special code that needs to be activated first, which is just this bar here. Whatever colour that is, that's the code. So you need to make sure the code matches whatever it's supposed to be in the game. How do you know what code it's supposed to be? Well, you've got to listen to all of the dialogue.
Whoa, what's this? This is special vintage.
Oh, Jeffrey, don't be so selfish. Think of the poor, starving augurs.
The characters will explain when they're going to change this code, and you have to keep track of it in order to know which colour it needs to be. If you're on the wrong colour, when you press the trap button, it won't work. Although realistically, you can get through the game by just furiously spamming both the circle button and the, I think it's L1 button, which changes the colour. The chances of you catching everyone like that and getting a perfect game is pretty slim, but you should be able to make it through to the end. If you don't catch enough guys, then the place is considered overrun and you lose.
Look, it was your job to protect Kelly and the rest of those girls. But from what I've just seen, the place is being overrun. You've missed way too many of those suckers. Now, until you figure out how to do your job and do it right, you're dismissed. Breaking contact.
You also have to keep the teenagers and SWAT team members safe. If they get captured and, I guess, killed, I don't really know what these guys do to them, but whatever. If something happens to them, you'll also lose. If you do want to catch every bad guy and get a perfect game, you're going to have to miss a lot of the acted scenes. Really, you're going to need to memorize when the code changes and what cameras to look at what time. And as for the acted scenes, if you're wondering what it's about, it's a bunch of teenagers coming to live in a vampire's house, but the house is full of crazy booby traps, and for some reason, these guys are breaking in to use these strange devices to attack the teenage girls. It's a 100% B-movie plot, and I end up way too invested in trying to capture all of the bad guys that I often miss half of what it's about. You could probably tell from my very basic explanation of the storyline here, even though it's an f.m.v game, so it's essentially an interactive movie. You'd think I'd know what's going on, but it all boils down to keep the good guys safe and capture the bad guys. The truest way to experience it is the old-fashioned way. Multiple playthroughs and a lot of memorization. Now for the PS4 version, you get a lot of options and extras. First of all, you can select which UI layout you prefer. There's a new version which you can use, but you've also got different UIs representing the classic releases of the game on the different systems it came out on. So if you're new to the game, you can just use whatever layout you like the look of. But if you played the game in the past and you want to experience it the way you originally did, you can, and that's a nice option to have. It's also the first time we're looking at this footage in such high quality. It used to look terrible on the old systems, especially the Sega CD. That version was horribly limited, but also perhaps the most famous. Other extras you can find in the basement. You've got some documentary style footage here, which is pretty cool. A really interesting interview, and quite a lot of stuff that's unlockable, and you have to do pretty well as well to get some of these unlockables, like getting a perfect game, or getting through the survivor mode. Yeah, there's a survivor mode. I'll talk about that in a minute after I finish with the bonus stuff. There's also a prototype of the original version of the game, but that has to be unlocked too. By the looks of it from the documentary footage, it was a pretty different game and was a kinda whodunit mystery. But I gotta say, it's kind of working on me. I'm tempted to go back and play this game a little bit more to see if I can unlock it and try it out. So the survivor mode is pretty simple. It keeps on going and you progress through levels, but really just whole segments of the game play out, but with the code, that is the colour, changing at random intervals. It's also a lot more strict in terms of how many bad guys you can let go, so it's all focused on trying to capture all of those freaky dudes, and a lot less on trying to enjoy the story, or experience I should say. It's like the Night Trap Expert Plus edition. Only the pros will like this one.
Purple.
Now, we can't talk about Night Trap without at least mentioning a lot of the controversy it caused at the time. Believe it or not, Night Trap played a significant part in North America getting a rating systems for games.
The one good thing that came from Night Trap is that it created a rating system for titles.
Citing its gratuitous sex and violence towards women. That all leads to one big question.
Have you ever actually played this game?
And obviously, no one who is opposing the game actually even bothered to play it.
And the shareholders of the company is shame on you.
And if you're thinking, oh, it was a long time ago, things might have been different back then, we're talking about the early 90s here. There was a lot worse coming out, especially in cinemas and on TV. Night Trap was even tame by the standards of the time. You gotta think, this is 20 or so years after films like The Exorcist and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre were released. The fact that this was getting parents fearing for their children's innocence is mind-boggling. The documentary included with this game goes in depth on this whole situation, and I'd recommend watching it. You can probably find it on YouTube or something, I'm sure, along with a lot of other information.
I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system.
It's still crazy to think that this was spoken about in the same breath as games like Mortal Kombat and Doom. Like I said before, had they even played it? Well, we know the answer is no, but God, how ridiculous is this? It reminds me of the old Video Nasties controversy that went on in the 80s here in the UK, with half of those horror movies being completely tame and ridiculous, yet ending up banned anyway. And it may have taken a quarter of a century, but we finally got it on modern day consoles, including Nintendo, so things change over time, I guess. And to say this is tame compared to the sort of stuff you get today, even PG stuff you get today, this is real tame in comparison. But it's actually quite fun. It's cool to see all the footage in high definition for the first time. Now this does get a bit of a reputation as an old, bad game. Now I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe it's the fact that there's not a huge amount of gameplay, it's more an interactive movie than a full-on video game, but it's actually not that bad at all. Even by today's standards, it's pretty fun to play. It's interesting to see the ways they were experimenting with new technology and trying to take games into a more realistic world, even if it doesn't exactly succeed that. Now, frustratingly, this got released on the PlayStation Network only in North America from what I can tell. Here in Europe, we're still waiting for it, so if you want to play it in the UK, for example, you've got to get the physical copy, and the physical copy is a limited run only release, so it's on the more expensive side of things, and it's likely never going to go down, not anytime soon at least. It is also available on Vita. I don't have that version of it, I'll look at it one day. There might be differences, there might not. I expect there's no difference. The only thing they may have been able to do with a Vita version is have touchscreen controls, but I don't know if they put the effort in to do that. It would be a little bit much, I'm guessing, especially by the time this came out anyway. The Vita was sadly already being totally ignored by Sony, which is a shame. So that's Night Trap, the cult king of the f.m.v genre. Next time I'll look at another f.m.v game, which is a little bit different. I'll see you next time, where we're going to kill some corpses.
You know, I have this horrible feeling that 20 years from now, somebody's going to call me and say, Jim, we want to do an interview, you know? And I'm going to say, great, you know, is it Wirehead? Is it this new show? And, no, Night Trap, the classic, the great, you know, we want to get the behind the scenes of Night Trap.
My name is Jim Riley, and I was co-creator, writer, and director on Night Trap.